Hello folks, good to have you back on our malicious compliance. In today's video, my employer terminated me because I went to my own mother's funeral, alleging I was performing poorly and causing financial loss. Consequently, I chose to demonstrate what performing my duties correctly really involved. The federal authorities sided with me, resulting in an $8 million payout. The Reddit post begins as follows. I had spent roughly 3 years employed at a medical billing firm. This business handled insurance filings for numerous medical offices, minor hospitals, and urgent care facilities spanning several states. My official designation was compliance analyst, which essentially meant I was charged with guaranteeing that the claims we sent to Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance companies were precise and adhered to all federal rules. When you consider it, the role is quite significant. Taxpayers lose billions of dollars annually due to healthcare fraud. Much of this occurs via deceptive billing tactics, such as upcoding, unbundling, or charging for care that was never delivered, that sort of activity. My duty was to intercept mistakes before they were processed and highlight anything appearing dubious. I took this responsibility to heart because I truly had faith in my work. Safeguarding the healthcare infrastructure against fraud might seem dull, but it is a necessary task. Initially, the organization was quite respectable regarding compliance. The founder had created the enterprise from the ground up and realized that bypassing compliance protocols was inviting trouble. He had witnessed other billing agencies closed down by federal agents and wanted to avoid that fate. So yes, we possessed genuine procedures and supervision, and when I flagged an issue, it was actually resolved. However, approximately a year before the incident, the founder chose to retire. He sold the business to a private equity group focused on buying healthcare service companies. You can likely predict the outcome. The new proprietors installed their own leadership, and suddenly, the focus shifted entirely to maximizing profit margins and meeting quarterly goals. The incoming CEO was an individual with zero experience in healthcare billing. His history was with some logistics-related tech startup. He knew nothing about CMS rules, the False Claims Act, or any crucial industry details. Yet, he had strong views on how we were missing out on revenue and needed to be more assertive with our billing. At first, I attempted to operate within the existing framework. When I encountered problematic claims, I flagged them per usual. And when the new leadership resisted and instructed me to approve them regardless, I recorded everything. I maintained precise logs of every discussion, every email, and every occasion where I voiced objections and was overruled. I had learned from past employment that documentation is your greatest ally when situations go awry. However, the issues I observed were severe. Account managers were urging the medical practices we served to upcode their treatments. If a patient arrived for a standard office consultation, they would recommend billing it as a comprehensive exam to extract more funds from Medicare. We had coders unbundling treatments that ought to have been billed jointly, splitting a single charge into 3 distinct ones. We were invoicing for follow-up appointments that never took place. The trend was undeniable. The new administration was systematically inflating claims to increase income, and they were exploiting the medical practices' faith in us to accomplish it. A specific event remains vivid in my mind. One client was a modest family medicine clinic mainly catering to elderly Medicare patients. Their billing history had always been honest and simple. Following the management change, I observed their average reimbursement per appointment had surged by nearly 40% in merely 3 months. Upon investigation, I discovered their assigned account manager had been assisting them in reclassifying visits to higher-value codes. I retrieved charts for random patient sampling and matched them against the billing codes. A patient visiting for a blood pressure check and prescription refill was billed as a comprehensive preventive exam. A standard follow-up for a managed chronic illness was coded as requiring complex medical decision-making. It was a classic case of upcoding, occurring across numerous accounts. When I flagged this specific account for examination, the account manager burst into my office, demanding to understand why I was meddling with her clients. She insisted the practices were pleased with the boosted revenue and that I was going to destroy the partnership. I clarified that the coding did not align with the documentation and that filing these claims could subject both us and the practice to federal fraud accusations. She dismissed me as paranoid, claiming everyone does it. I escalated the matter to the CEO, whose reaction was that I needed to collaborate better and cease causing tension with account managers. He stated the practices were our clients, and if they were at ease with the billing, I had no right to question them. When I noted that my specific role was to guarantee their compliance with federal rules, he replied that I was ignoring the broader perspective and my demeanor was becoming an issue. I then took my worries to the director of operations, who was a hire from the original owner. He concurred that matters were deteriorating, but admitted his hands were tied. The new owners had established that meeting revenue goals was the sole priority, and anyone disagreeing could seek employment elsewhere. He advised me to stay low profile and do my best, though he looked defeated. Around this time, my mother fell ill. She had been experiencing health troubles for a time, but we believed they were controllable. Then came the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and doctors revealed it was already stage 4. They estimated perhaps 6 months if treatment succeeded. Spoiler alert, it did not succeed. This was my mother, the woman who raised me, working 2 jobs during my childhood to ensure I lacked nothing. She drove 6 hours each way to witness my college graduation and called every Sunday without fail just to check on my week. Discovering she was dying felt like the earth vanishing beneath my feet. I discussed the scenario with my supervisor and inquired about using intermittent leave under FMLA to assist in her care. He was sympathetic and instructed me to do whatever was necessary. Over the ensuing months, I flew to visit her every few weeks, typically utilizing long weekends. I worked remotely whenever possible and maintained my duties as well as I could under the conditions. The treatments were severe. Chemotherapy left her so frail she could hardly leave her bed. My father attempted to care for her alone, but being in his 70s, it was wearing him down. I aimed to be present as much as possible, while also clinging to my job because we required the health insurance. Throughout this period, I sensed the new management was irritated by my absences. They never spoke directly, but there were remarks about some staff being more dedicated than others and specific inquiries about when I would fully return to standard hours. I recorded these exchanges as well, just to be safe. Then, one day, my father called. Mom's condition had deteriorated, and the physician estimated she likely had only a few days remaining. I immediately informed my supervisor that I needed to depart, and he authorized my PTO request instantly. I flew out that very day. And here is where the situation complicates. While I was away, the director of operations was terminated. He was among the last remnants of the old administration, and the new CEO finally determined he had to leave. In his stead, they promoted a truly terrible individual who had previously served as a regional account manager. This man was one of the worst culprits regarding pressuring practices to upcode. And now, he controlled the entire operation. I learned of this while sitting at the hospital with my mother. A colleague texted me the news. At that instant, I frankly did not care. My mother was dying, and that was the only thing that mattered. My mother passed away on a Tuesday morning. I was holding her hand when it occurred, with my father on the other side of the bed. It was the most difficult moment of my life. Afterward, there was so much to handle: funeral plans, informing family, sorting her belongings, and supporting my father, who was utterly shattered. They had been married over 40 years. The service was set for that Friday. I had already informed my supervisor I would require roughly a week and a half to manage everything, and he had approved it prior to his firing. And I possessed that approval in writing, meaning my PTO was legitimate. I assumed that would conclude the matter, but it did not. The day following my mother's funeral, I received a call from the new director of operations. Bear in mind, I had never actually spoken to this man before, as his promotion occurred while I was away. He called on a Saturday, the day after I buried my mother, and his opening words were an inquiry into when I planned to return to work. I clarified that I had approved PTO through the coming Wednesday, signed off by my previous supervisor, and he declared that unacceptable because a significant amount of work had accumulated in my absence, and my extended leave was apparently costing the firm money. I reminded him I was coping with my mother's death and my leave was properly authorized. His reply was essentially, "I grasp that, but we all have personal struggles. The business cannot cease functioning due to your family situation. I need you back by Monday." I was astounded. I informed him that was impossible as I was still out of state assisting my father, and affairs still required attention. And he stated he would note my refusal to return and we would address it upon my arrival. That discussion established the atmosphere for what ensued. When I finally came back to the office about a week later, I was summoned to a meeting with the new director of operations and an HR representative. I assumed they would merely reprimand me for the extended absence. But the reality was far worse. The director sat opposite me with a smug expression and informed me that my performance had been assessed during my leave. He claimed a comprehensive audit of my work revealed I had been denying legitimate claims without adequate justification, and my excessive caution was costing the business hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost income. I could not credit what I was hearing. The claims I rejected were those I deemed potentially fraudulent or non-compliant with federal regulations. That was precisely my duty. But according to him, I had been performing my job incorrectly this entire time, and my absence allowed them to examine my work and realize how much money I was leaving on the table. He then slid a document across the desk. It was a termination letter citing performance failures and inability to meet departmental standards. The HR representative looked uneasy but remained silent. I asked if this related to my time off for my mother's funeral. He denied it, insisting this was strictly regarding job performance. I asked why, if my performance was so poor, I never received written warnings or a performance improvement plan. He stated the audit results were self-evident and the company had the right to terminate me for cause, but I knew exactly what was transpiring. They were firing me because I was a barrier to their fraudulent billing schemes, and my absence provided the excuse they needed to remove me by framing it as a performance issue. They believed they could evade legal liability for firing someone who had just taken bereavement leave. I was furious, grieving, and drained. And something within me simply broke. He claimed I wasn't performing my job correctly and my caution was costing the company money. Furthermore, that I was denying legitimate claims. Fine, if that was their belief, I intended to demonstrate exactly what performing my job correctly looked like. This is the reason I shared this on the malicious compliance subreddit. You see, over the years, I maintained meticulous records of every dubious claim management had overridden. Whenever I flagged something as potentially fraudulent and was ordered to approve it, I noted it. I held copies of emails where supervisors instructed me to be less conservative with reviews. I possessed spreadsheets tracking patterns of upcoding and unbundling across client accounts and fraud. I even had recordings of meetings where new management openly debated strategies for so-called maximizing reimbursement rates, tactics any compliance professional would identify as code for fraud. I initially gathered this data to protect myself if the company faced investigation. I figured if federal agents arrived, I wanted to prove I raised concerns and was overruled. But now, I had a different purpose for it. The day following my termination, I began compiling everything I possessed because, remember, the boss told me I wasn't doing my job correctly. So, I chose to do it correctly for once. It took roughly 2 weeks to organize it into a comprehensive dossier. I documented specific claims submitted fraudulently, pinpointed patterns across numerous client accounts, and supplied internal communications demonstrating management was aware of and directing the fraud. Then I lodged a complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General. For those unaware, the OIG is the federal agency charged with investigating healthcare fraud. When you hear of billing firms facing massive fines or people going to jail for Medicare fraud, the OIG is typically involved. They have the power to audit, subpoena records, and refer cases for criminal prosecution. I also filed a separate complaint with my state attorney general's office since some affected practices were in-state providers, and I consulted an attorney specializing in whistleblower cases under the False Claims Act, FCA. Private citizens reporting fraud against the federal government can receive a portion of recovered funds. It is called a qui tam action. I was uncertain if anything would result from it. I had heard tales of whistleblower complaints being ignored or taking years to investigate, but I had done all I could, so I attempted to move forward. I secured a new position at a different firm within a couple of months. The new place was smaller but possessed a vastly different culture. They actually valued compliance and realized that doing things properly was better long-term than cutting corners for short-term gain. I concentrated on helping my father adjust to life without my mother. He was lost without her. They had been together since high school, and he didn't know how to be solitary. I flew to see him every few weeks, assisted in sorting my mom's belongings, and ensured he was eating and caring for himself. It was difficult, but it also aided me in processing my own grief. I tried not to dwell on the people at my old company who treated me so wretchedly during the worst period of my life. Occasionally, I would wake in the night, still furious about that phone call the day after my mom's funeral. Other times, I felt guilty for not simply letting it go. But mostly, I waited and hoped my complaint would lead to something. Then, approximately 8 months later, I received a call. The investigation had uncovered what they termed systematic and pervasive fraud in the company's billing practices. My documentation had been vital in identifying the fraud scope and the responsible individuals. The attorney informed me that my records essentially provided them a roadmap. The emails showing management directing staff to approve questionable claims, the spreadsheets tracking upcoding patterns across client accounts, and the meeting recordings where executives discussed aggressive billing strategies. All of it was verified and expanded upon through subpoenas and further investigation. They were preparing to take action and wished to interview me as a witness. I spent several hours with federal investigators reviewing everything I observed during my employment, answering detailed questions about specific accounts, claims, and conversations. It was exhausting but also validating. Someone was finally taking this seriously. A complex legal process ensued, which I cannot detail fully as some aspects remain confidential. However, I can share the result. The company faced civil penalties under the False Claims Act totaling slightly over $5 million and was forced to pay around $2.5 million to settle related claims with various state Medicaid programs. Furthermore, they were required to enter a corporate integrity agreement with the OIG, meaning federal supervision for 5 years with regular audits and mandatory compliance training. The expense of implementing that oversight was estimated at several $100,000 per year. Many medical practices they served terminated contracts once the news broke, as no one wants association with a firm busted for Medicare fraud. The reputational harm likely cost them millions more in lost business. The new CEO, who orchestrated the scheme, was excluded from participating in any federal healthcare programs. That is essentially a career death sentence in healthcare administration. Last I heard, he resigned quietly, and the company was attempting to rebuild under new leadership. The director of operations who fired me, the man who called the day after my mother's funeral to demand my return, was named individually in the government findings as directing fraudulent practices. He faces potential criminal charges, though I am unaware of the current status. I hope he reflects on that phone call daily. I hope he recalls what he said to someone who had just buried their mother. I also hope the repercussions follow him for his entire career. The account manager who stormed into my office is also named and no longer works in healthcare. Good. I still think of my mother every day. She was a nurse for 30 years before retiring and always spoke of the importance of doing the right thing, even when difficult. Even when it would be easier to look away, or when everyone else said to go along with it. She would have been proud to know her son did not let a group of corporate fraudsters get away with cheating the healthcare system she dedicated her life to. Mom, this was for you. Edit, since many are asking, yes, I am doing better now. The grief persists, but carrying it becomes easier. My father is doing okay as well. We check on each other regularly. The following segment is another malicious compliance tale, titled Mystery Shopping Nonsense. If you appreciate these stories, please remember to like the video as it helps immensely. Years ago, while employed at a major convenience store chain, we had corporate hired mystery shoppers who would secretly assess the location. Employee wages depended on these reviews. I worked an overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. alone. This is crucial because the evaluation criteria included asinine items like hot fresh coffee, a full roller grill, etc. Lacking these resulted in point deductions and, consequently, no raises. If you have worked this type of job, you know it is absurd during those night hours with few customers. The goal is balancing availability against waste. However, after missing raises 2 rounds in a row because, per store policy, I didn't prepare extra coffee or grill items at night, I discussed it with my boss. I said, I realize this is corporate policy, and I also know our store policy forbids this at night. So, what can a night shift worker do to secure a better evaluation? Nothing adversarial, but the boss replied, just ensure you receive full points on every line. That is your only job, and handed me another evaluation list to study. Okay. Cue malicious compliance. For the next few weeks, I ensured fresh coffee, decaf and regular roast, was made. At 10 p.m. upon arrival, I fully stocked the roller grill with hot dogs, jalapeno sausage dogs, taquitos. Then at midnight, when exactly none of this had sold, I locked the doors to stock the coolers, a standard night shift task taking about an hour. So at 1 a.m., I would discard all roller grill items, pour the coffee down the drain, brew 2 fresh pots, restock the grill, and reopen. Then at 4 a.m., I would dump it all and make fresh again because it had sat for 2 hours. The boss summoned me and stated that as long as I scored 10s on all other items, I would receive my raise alongside everyone else from then on. Just, for Christ's sake, stop wasting $100 of merchandise per night that doesn't sell. No problem, boss. Thanks. It is unfortunate you didn't notice the issue until it impacted your bottom line. The final entry is a malicious compliance story titled, Malicious Compliance on Boss Led to New Job and Him Being Fired. Nearly 30 years ago, I worked for the U.S. National Sales Division of a major automotive brand. I was in product planning, assisting with new vehicle launches, but was junior level at the time. My boss was incredibly strict. He was the type to blame others when he erred or claimed full credit for successes. One Friday, he dumped a task on me. A shipment of wheels and tires had to reach Europe by the following Monday for a photo shoot. This was the same trip for which he had previously denied my travel request. Furthermore, he knew about these items a week or more prior, and I suspect he was trying to make me look incompetent by assigning it at the last minute. And when I asked how I was supposed to pack and ship these to arrive in 2 days, he told me to simply get it done and not bother him with further details. He wanted the wheels and tires back ASAP after the shoot. So, I triggered malicious compliance. I booked a flight to Europe and checked the wheels and tires as oversized luggage. I rented a van, collected the items, and delivered them to the photo shoot. I handled the business, stayed for the next 2 days, and then brought the wheels and tires back with me on the return flight Tuesday morning. What was so sweet was that the on-site executives were very impressed by my dedication to making the shoot a success. Apparently, one executive sent a note to my boss praising my support in making the event work. To say my boss was furious is an understatement. However, he could do nothing but accept the credit as his plan. Shortly after, I was offered a role as vehicle manager in the corporate communications group, which I gladly accepted, even though my boss attempted to prevent it. My former boss was let go about 4 months later. Apparently, he had no one else to blame for his mistakes. And yes, folks, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.